Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the Constitution is the necessary and proper clause. It delegates to Congress the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Now, does that mean Congress can pass any law which they think is necessary and proper? Enter the new law, H.R. 3684, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Now, in Section 24220, Congress finds it necessary to require new cars to include drunk and impaired driving technology. The question we should all ask, is that a power vested in the government of the United States? So we'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans, and welcome to the Constitution Study. This is where we read and study the Constitution. We teach a rising generation be free. Glad you could join me. You know, as always, you can find out more at the website, but I've been reminding you I'm about to start my new online Constitution Study. Now, if you'd like to give it a try, absolutely free, go to constitutionstudy.com/study. You can get the introductory sections, the Bill of Rights sections, absolutely free. And you can find out how to get the rest of it there as well. Of course, if you have any questions or you just want to register, all of that's available right there at the website. I'll talk more about that at the end of this video. But for now, let's talk about the infrastructure bill and this requirement for drunk and impaired driving technology. I'm sure there are plenty of Americans out there who think requiring technology put in cars to prevent drunk driving is necessary. Let me remind you what William Pitt the Younger said. Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves. Like most Americans, I think operating a 2-ton machine while impaired is dangerous and irresponsible. Does that mean it's within the power of the federal government to impose their opinion of how best to deal with this problem on the American people? It's not a question of whether the technology is good or bad, or even if this is a viable method of reducing drunk driving. Instead, it's a question whether the federal government has a legitimate power to do so. Now, Congress found several reasons why they should pass such legislation. Congress finds that alcohol-impaired driving fatalities represent approximately 1/3 of all highway fatalities in the United States each year. In 2019, there were 10,142 alcohol-impaired driving fatalities in the United States involving drivers with a blood alcohol concentration level of 0.08 or higher, and 68% of the crashes that resulted in those fatalities involved a driver with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.15 or higher. The estimated economic cost of alcohol-impaired driving in 2010 was $44 billion. According to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, advanced drunk and impaired driving prevention technology can prevent more than 9,400 impaired driving fatalities annually, and to ensure the prevention of alcohol-impaired driving fatalities, advanced drunk and impaired driving prevention technology must be standard equipment in all new passenger motor vehicles. Let's assume that the first 4 statements are true. Does that mean Congress has the legal authority to tell car manufacturers that certain technology must be included in their products? Does Congress have the legal authority to tell the American people they must have and pay for this technology in their property, whether they want it or not? Where do property rights, liberty, and responsibility come into play? Now, the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." Now, in H.R. 3684, Congress once again is taking control of your property. When you purchase a vehicle, it's your property. This legislation claims to allow the United States to further take control of that property by defining what technology must be in it. Furthermore, it claims the power to restrain your ability to purchase a vehicle without this technology. Now, in his 1828 dictionary, Noah Webster defined liberty this way: freedom from restraint in a general sense and applicable to the body or to the will or mind. Civil liberty is the liberty of men in a state of society or natural liberty, so far only abridged and restrained as is necessary and expedient for the safety and interest of the society, state, or nation. A restraint of natural liberty, not necessary or expedient for the public, is tyranny or oppression. You may be asking yourself what this has to do with drunk driving laws. Well, if civil liberty is a state of society where you can live free, where the only restraints allowed are those that are necessary to the safety and interests of society, then we need to ask if Section 24-220 of H.R. 3684 is necessary for the safety of society. Driving while impaired is not only a danger to the driver, but to anyone else around them. Therefore, a law punishing the act is necessary to the safety and interests of society, and not a violation of one's liberty. Does that, however, extend to the new vehicle requirements in H.R. 3684? The primary purpose of the advanced drunk and impaired driving technology described in H.R. 3684 is to prevent the driver from driving while impaired. In other words, it's an attempt to save the driver from him or herself, which then, by extension, makes society safer. Like any technology, it will not be 100% effective, meaning there will be times when an impaired driver will not be stopped by this technology, and other times when it will prevent a non-impaired driver from using their property. Not to mention the likelihood that there will be people who will find ways to defeat this new technology or simply purchase older cars that do not include it. It imposes a restraint on all citizens as a punishment for the actions of a few. If drunk and impaired driving is as dangerous as Congress says, though, why not include this type of technology? Put another way, if you have nothing to hide, why oppose the legislation? Well, the answer is simple. Although I have nothing to hide, I have everything to protect. Impaired driving prevention technology has been available for years and has been a requirement as a punishment for those convicted of a crime. On the other hand, this legislation treats everyone as guilty, requiring they prove they are not drunk without any probable cause. It deprives them of the liberty to not have to deal with or pay for technology without due process of law. It also deprives them of the control of their property without due process of law. In the end, this makes it a violation of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Now, Congress claims the power to legislate motor vehicle safety standards under the Commerce Clause, which reads, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, since most vehicles sold in the United States are manufactured either outside of the country or within a handful of states, the car you drive was most likely sold over state lines. Hence, Congress claims the authority to regulate any aspect of motor vehicles. Was that what the framers of the Constitution meant by regulating commerce? Now, Noah Webster defined regulate as to subject to rules or restrictions, as to regulate trade, to regulate diet. This legislation, and indeed most of Title 49, regulate the product, not the commerce of the product. Can the regulation of commerce legally be used to violate the civil liberties of the American people? Now, I have to admit, this law posed a conundrum for me. My first instinct is to oppose it simply because, once again, we see Congress telling the American people how to live their lives. There are parallels between Section 24-220 and H.R. 3684 and legislation such as fuel mileage, helmet, and seatbelt laws that, while well-intentioned, violate the rights of motor vehicle operators everywhere. On the other hand, drunk and impaired driving is a danger to others in society, which brings into question if it is a violation of civil liberty. So I believe those who drive while intoxicated or impaired should be held accountable for the damage they do. I'm also in favor of sentences for drunk or impaired driving that require some sort of prevention system for the guilty. However, is the just response to treat everyone as a drunk driver until they prove otherwise? Did our founding fathers imagine the Commerce Clause to be used not simply to regulate commerce across state and national borders, but as an excuse to regulate anything that goes across these borders? See, regulation of transportation is not a power delegated to the United States, so it remains with the states or the people. Yet Congress claims the power to regulate motor vehicle safety simply because the majority of vehicles were, at some point, sold across state lines. With all of the reports about stricter laws and harsher penalties regarding drunk or impaired driving, is Congress meddling in something that's already being dealt with at the state level? And what about innovation? See, H.R. 3684 looks to passively monitor the performance of the driver. There are already technologies available to do so, and more in development, from lane diversion and obstacle alerts to monitoring the driver's eyes for attentiveness. While some of these technologies are available in modern cars, some are not ready yet. So if the Secretary of Transportation is allowed to pick which systems will be approved, we'll have no idea how many other technologies will not see the light of day, all because Congress thinks they know better than the states and the American people. If history is any guide, the people who wish to drink and drive will outsmart any ideas Congress can come up with. Which brings me back to William Pitt the Younger. Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves. The argument of Congress that this must be done to keep people safe is just another tyrannical attempt to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. And while I believe the drunk driver should be punished for the harm they do, I am not willing to enslave myself to government simply because they say so. This is going to be one of those issues where the sides are divided, and for good reason. See, the vast majority of the American people don't like the fact that people drive drunk. They are a danger to them and their families and society. They cause tremendous amount of harm, and we want it stopped. But is the federal government the right place to do it? Is the federal government legally allowed to do it? Is this just another example of Congress manipulating the use of the Commerce Clause to do what they're not allowed to do simply because they think it's necessary or just important? My issue with this legislation is less about the drunk driving technology and more about Congress mandating that it be in vehicles. See, many of the technologies we take for granted today, airbags, anti-lock brakes, automatic transmissions, were technologies that were developed and grew into the marketplace because the people wanted them. Yes, they were first deployed in high-end platforms because, well, that's where they could be afforded, but they eventually worked their way through all of the vehicles we buy nowadays. So what happens when Congress says, no, you have to do this? Just take, for example, the technologies of airbags and anti-lock brakes. They were introduced in vehicles, granted high-end vehicles, because people wanted these safety tools. They were working their way down into the other markets, the less expensive vehicles, when Congress stepped in and said, you have to include them. Meaning, these cars that didn't have the margins to support it suddenly had to get more expensive to pay for the new technology, rather than waiting for the technology to be inexpensive enough and desirable enough for the people to want it. Congress stepped in and said, no, we know better. Makes me wonder what other technologies could have been developed that were stifled because, well, you have to have an airbag. What other restraint systems might have been introduced if the airbag technology was not the only one approved by government? What other technologies could have been developed besides anti-lock brakes if Congress hadn't stepped in and said, that's the only one you have to have? We never think of that part of the argument. And it's one of the things I want to do here at the Constitution Study is not simply look at, is the technology good or bad? Is the legislation beneficial or not? Is it legal? Is it constitutional? Is it authorized? Because if laws don't mean anything, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. If it doesn't matter anymore, then we live in a lawless nation. Because the laws are no longer defined by what we the people have established or what our representatives have passed in our name. It's whatever some bureaucrat can come up with as a good idea. I've watched as this country has slipped from more and more from a nation of laws to a nation of men. And I've watched it accelerate over the last few years. And while Congress and the executive branch and the courts have done a lot to accelerate this, ultimately the blame lies at the feet of the American people. Because through our ignorance and our apathy, we've let them get away with it. Now, if you want to learn more, you can always head to constitutionstudy.com. That's where I put all my articles, videos, everything there is free for you to use, everything there is free for you to share. You can register for the online Constitution Study. We're going to go through the entire Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, every clause, every phrase. I will read it, we'll describe it, I'll give you some background on it, and we will discuss it. In other words, I'm not simply going to be talking to you. I want participation. I want people to come in and ask questions and point out different points of view and maybe even get into a debate. This is going to be a long-term project. This is going to take up most of 2022. But if you want to try it, I'm giving the first section, the Bill of Rights, absolutely free. Just register at constitutionstudy.com/study, and you can join the live event. And if you can't make the live event, don't worry. I'm recording this, and I'll make it available on my other website, constitutionscholars.com. The free part that you can join, the Bill of Rights, will be free on that site. Now, I'm also working on some other things to include in there as well. And while I'm talking about Constitution Scholars, that's right, check out the site, constitutionscholars.com. See, I'm hoping that in 2022, you've promised yourself, you've made if not a New Year's resolution, you just decided you want to learn more about the Constitution because you want to know more, maybe because you want your children to know more about their rights, their responsibilities, their liberty, their freedom. Well, that's what Constitution Scholars are about. We are students of the Constitution. That's what a scholar is. And on the website, you can find other scholars, you can find a library of materials, you can find online classes, both free and paid for. You can, most importantly, find groups of scholars, either by your state or by some other group that you want to join, where you can find like-minded people, find people to discuss and debate with, be engaged, not feel alone. So give that a try. Either Constitution Study or Constitution Scholars, try them both. If you can support the work that we're doing here, you can find a donation page at constitutionstudy.com. And I'm still looking to do tours around the country. So if you'd like me to come speak at your event or in front of your group, well, you can do that there as well. Most of all, please, as we look at 2022, let's not react emotionally to a situation that's before us. Let's read and study the Constitution. Let's teach the rising generation to be free. Let us recognize when our rights are being violated, and most importantly, be prepared to defend and assert them. Because if we wish to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, we're going to have to do the work. And if you found this engaging and worth your time, well, I want to see you here next time on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand.